Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at TheMaxDean, and I am back with Tre'Shon Diaz of Defiant Takes Football as well. He is at Trey3Sean, right? Is that how we decided we were going to say it?
Yeah,
Right.
no, perfect.
On Twitter. And today we have a show where we are going to be talking about all of the top linebackers in the NFL. So we are going to rank 10 through 1 each of our top backer lists and kind of bounce off each other and just see why some of us have ranked differently than the others. Now, the interesting thing is with linebackers, we've had a lot of conversations about positional value and why certain players are paid versus others not being so much, why some are taken more highly in the draft, and why some aren't prioritized. And linebackers are one where there's a few guys who are highly paid, but for the most part, they are a tier down. And there are some guys who we talk about getting overpaid. And I think the linebacker position is interesting because there just aren't that many players that are really truly elite at the position. So the market kind of stagnates for a while until finally a couple of guys step up and push it, So for the time being, we are going to, regardless of the fact that there's a clear difference between those top guys and maybe the bottom 5, 6, we're still going to rank them as such, but we will kind of point out when that time comes. We're like, okay, so we've kind of gotten through the guys that are, pretty decent and where there might be a lot of guys who could fit into that range. And then these are the guys who really feel like are elite. And when we were talking about running backs, we had kind of a similar situation. And then when we had receivers, it was the opposite. It was like there are so many guys that we feel like should be in this list, right, that we have to leave off, right? That there would have been a pretty long honorable mention segment. So that's where we are with the linebackers, and we're going to jump into it here. But first of all, how are you doing today, Tre'Shon?
Man, I'm doing good. Rookie mini camp is starting to wrap up. Exciting to see all the new guys out there and everything like that. And had a good time putting together this list. It was definitely like you said, when you're kind of in that 10 to 6 range, it's kind of, it almost is like a pick your own flavor, because there's very many reasons for one way or the other that you would take a guy, with a certain skill set over another, because like you said, there's very few guys that have broken through the mold of good to great. So it makes it a little tougher to judge. So I had a good time putting this list together.
Yeah, I mean it was fun, and I'm realizing right now that I forgot somebody, and so like I'm on the fly having to adjust that ever so slightly. But I'm gonna just do that right now. But yeah, the linebacker position itself is just gone through such a change over the past 20 years, right? So you look back at 2004, 2005, even leading up to 2010, and we really were still looking at that quintessential middle linebacker, right? There were different versions. If you're looking at a 3-4 versus a 4-3, you might have the one Mike backer and then a couple of guys who are a little bit smaller on the outside. Or if you're in the 3-4, then you might have a couple really big, stout run stuffers at the position. But regardless, like that model was, really was who was the perfect example of that, like a Patrick Willis type, right?
Yeah, like Patrick, Brian Urlacher, those guys, Ray Lewis. It's funny that you talk. You don't really have to look that far back, and like you said, it's like almost an embarrassment of riches during that 2004, 2005, that era from there back to the 90s of linebackers who, it's a glory position. Those guys, were on the cover of Madden and stuff like that, and I don't know if we'll see that again for a while.
We could see one grace the cover of Madden, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that there will be one who will be able to beat out quarterbacks or wide receivers. I'm not sure that there's going to be a guy who's going to have that kind of pull within the NFL.
Yeah.
So, and I think even the dawn of the change in prototype began with a guy like Ray Lewis, who was a little bit undersized, right? And he was still
Mhm.
drafted highly, but maybe a little bit. He wasn't quite that 6'2", 250-pound guy, right? Like he
Right.
hit like that, but he moved a little bit faster. He was a little bit swifter, and that was kind of the beginning. So now, for the most part, you're rarely going to find guys who are 250 pounds on this list. Period.
Yeah.
Most of the best are just they can't be fast enough at that size. I think probably Bobby Wagner might be like the last guy who's really looks like that. And he
Yeah.
just had such special movement skills too. So, all right, let's jump into our list here. So I said I was going to send you mine in advance, and just obviously that
Ah,
didn't happen.
coming in blind, but that's all right. That's all right.
Right. Well, it's just going to be a little surprise for you, just like
Yeah.
everybody else. So, all right. So at number 10, you have Levante David, and I have Eric Kendricks. Both of these guys, older players, David a little bit even more so. And both of them were maybe at the top couple in their position for
Mm.
their prime. Neither are quite there anymore, but just we haven't had enough guys come in and just take over and push them out of that, right? Not enough
Yeah.
guys have come in and been elite and pushed these guys out of the top 10. So while they may not be the same special players that they once were in terms of just impact on the game, both are still very good. Both are tremendous veteran leaders, and both have the savvy to make up to some degree for their lost step in terms of speed. So kind of similar guys. Now, what made you have Levante David here at number 10 for you?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it already. A lot of it comes from that savviness. He's going into his 11th year now, and while he is a tad slower than he was in his youth, he already had natural instincts for the position, but now he has the veteran mind to go with it. His play recognition, his ability to quickly dissect, get to the ball, figure out what's going on, the fact that he's the leader of that Bucks defense, which is shortly removed from winning a Super Bowl. He's somebody that I think still has enough of that mental edge to be considered a top 10 linebacker in this league. So, I will say Eric Kendricks is also on my list. And he's somebody that I think I really like for a lot of the same reasons that you said.
Yeah, I mean, he's been the guy who fit at the center of what's his name? Um the coach who was up in Minnesota for a long time, came from
Oh,
Cincinnati
Mike.
before that. Yeah, Mike
Yeah,
Zimmer.
Mike
So
Zimmer.
he was the guy in the middle of Mike Zimmer's defense there in Minnesota for the entire run. Weren't sure how it was going to go with the new coaching staff coming in there. He stayed for one more season, and he kind of served as like a transitionary player. And I think based on what his salary was versus what he was bringing to the table, they were like, we're kind of in a resetting mode. We've got some young guys who are looking to extend. We're probably going to be changing the defense around a fair amount. So it was time to move on for him. And I think he's a player who still has a couple of good years left.
Mm-hmm.
And Levante David, man, he really pushed the boundaries of what we expect from guys at that position. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of age as well, right? So he was still one of the best players at linebacker, really up until this past year. I mean, and it's almost one of those things where that team struggled so much in so many ways that you almost wonder, is he still going to have like a really, really nice year? Now that the situation's changed for him a little bit.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, I think either one of these guys could arguably be a little bit higher, like anywhere from the 6 to 10 range. I'm really comfortable with that, and it's really just about choose your flavor. There's quite a few guys who still are like top notch linebackers, if not elite, but are just a little bit older at this point. So let's see here. Let me go ahead and fix this so that I can put our next guys up. So I've got. And then you have. All right, so I've already talked about Levante David here a little bit, so makes a lot of sense. But what has Jawan Bentley for you here at number 9?
Yeah, so Juwan, I think Juwan's probably maybe one of the more underrated or lesser known defenders in the league right now. Holding down the middle for Bill Belichick's defense. He's somebody who I think he's going into his 6th year now. He does a lot for that team. And I think he really cleaned up his pass coverage, which is what I would say was probably the weakest part of his game this last season. He's coming off his best year. He's still relatively young, just now hitting that second contract. So I really like him as a player, and he's done a great job in the middle of that Patriots defense. And he's somebody that it's hard for them to bring him off the field. He's pretty much playing most downs for them, and he does a lot in terms of managing the D line in front of him and everything like that. So Bill has a lot and puts a lot on his linebackers, always has. So he's somebody that I really like in the league right now that I think is kind of slept on.
He's definitely slept on. He's a good player. He really was. He fit the Bill Belichick mold, even though maybe size-wise, frame-wise, he didn't necessarily, because he's a guy that you can kind of line up all over the place. You can put him outside. You can have him rush as like a stand-up linebacker. You can have him blitz. They put him up on the line as like an interior, like 3 tech or whatever, like the lineup of a nose, whatever. Like, obviously not consistently, like not on a down to down basis, but he can just kind of do all the stuff that you want and just be enough of a problem doing it that it makes the offensive line have to account for him and not just be like, okay, we're just going to pretend he's not there, because he is a very physical player and he fits that defense very nicely, and he's come along well. I mean, he kind of came in as like the compatriot to Dante Hightower, and eventually took over that role. And so he's kind of the guy. And if that defense is going to be as good this year as it was last year, it's going to probably rely on him taking a little bit of the next step even. So he's not on my top 10 list, but just outside. I think, you could make the argument that some of the guys that I have, I mean, obviously you are making the argument that some of the guys that I have might not necessarily be on your list too, but I don't think that I'm not going to make a major pushback on that in any way, shape, or form. But I will say that your next guy, I would argue that my next guy should definitely be over your next guy, but I'm curious to see what you have to say about that. And
my
I get
next
it. I mean,
he's my most interesting guy. He was the one where I wasn't really sure, and this is going to be a huge year for him. So I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see. So lay it out there. I have CJ Mosley here at 8, and you have TJ Edwards. So Edwards is a guy who's coming up, and Mosley is a guy who's coming down. He fits right along with the Eric Kendricks and the Levante David, where these were very high-level players who are, crossing the 30 mark. Mosley's a little bit younger, but he also was that 350, 355 pounder middle linebacker, inside linebacker for the Ravens, came over to the Jets in a similar scheme and continued to be that. But now with the change in scheme, he's had to lose a little bit of weight to try and make up for the speed. Now, I think he still isn't elite in that category, but his play recognition, his leadership, I think he's a guy that I can't leave off the list. He made second team All-Pro last year. I'm not sure I'd expect that same type of performance from him, but I would say that, top 10 is still a place where he fits comfortably for me. And so I like TJ Edwards. I certainly don't. But for me, it would be hard to have him over a guy like CJ Mosley.
Yeah.
And I think, if you're going to choose either Juwan Bentley or TJ Edwards, I'm like, okay, one of those guys can stay, but one of them's got to go to fit Mosley on. So, first of all, make your case for Edwards. And then if you want to bounce off of why Mosley is not your guy, then you can do that too.
Yeah. So my case for Edwards. So TJ Edwards was somebody that I think even within the Eagles building coming into this year, they weren't really expecting a ton from. They brought in Kobe Dean, you have Kaiser White there. They had like a pretty solid linebacker room.
Mhm.
He's the reason why Kobe Dean didn't see the field last year. They literally couldn't bring him off. And he was, I thought, outstanding. I believe he led the team in tackles with 130 plus. And he was somebody who I thought had a really big year. Now, tackling numbers aren't really all that important in determining how good a linebacker is. I think it's great that he showed, that he's a consistent and sure tackler and things like that. Those are all good things to see. He didn't have a big broken tackle percentage on him or anything crazy. And I really liked what he showed in coverage. Now, he played behind the best defensive line in football. So when you're getting to play behind the best defensive line in football, things are a lot easier for you. Run lanes are, a little bit easier to dissect. They're a little bit less clogged, or, everything's kind of funneled right to you how you need it to be. And life's not really like that for a lot of other linebackers, but he is up and coming. He's only going into his 5th year now. I'm really excited to see the guy that he's going to be paired with on his new team, who I'll talk about, or we'll get to talk about at some point later. So I'm excited to see that. But he is somebody who I thought I'd probably get the most pushback for on this list, where I was like, he easily could be considered like, this is too soon. You're not quite top 10 yet. So I totally understand that. I think my thing with Mosley is that I really don't like the scheme right now, and I think he's a great player. I'm not, even with the lost weight, I'm still not seeing the same impact from the guy that I felt like we saw over in Baltimore.
Mhm.
I think that the Jets have done a really good job at setting up their own defensive line, so that I think that he's going to have life pretty easy moving forward. And I think that he is going to have a really great season this year. He was my number 11. Like, he was the guy that when I kept shifting people back and forth, he'd make it on my 10, but I'd get him back off. So I have no reservations with him being in and TJ being out, because I saw it that way myself a couple of times, but feel good about, kind of like you said, I feel like Edwards is on the up, and I think Mosley's starting to come down.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I understand that. I do. For me, Mosley, and I think one of the issues with Mosley is that he fell out of the public eye because he came over to the Jets, had an incredible half of football against the Bills in week 1, and then got hurt and basically missed the entire season. And then the season after that was COVID, and he was a COVID sit out. So he missed the entire season after that. So he missed 2 full seasons in his prime to like consistently remind people how good he was. And then he came back and he played on a team that had one of the worst defenses in football. But that was pretty much due to everything else around him rather than him. And then you saw that when you added some pieces and you make the investment, you have a breakout year from McQuinn Williams, and you see that he can still do a lot of what he used to. Now, again, like I don't think this scheme is perfect. I don't think that like it's the ideal fit for him out of everything that it could be, but I still think that he's that caliber of player. You see him in space. He still has some challenges breaking down and making tackles when it's one-on-one situations where like he has to, change direction. But if he's able to come forward, like he's sound in every technical aspect, and he just 99.9% of the time knows what's happening before it actually occurs. So for me, I just got to have him up there. All right. This is another one where I'm going to disagree with you on too. So I'm glad that we didn't have just like beat for beat same list, because that could definitely happen, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you make a ranking. All right. So at number 7, this is a guy that I've got to have on the list too. Dre Greenlaw is one of the best young linebackers in football to me. And honestly, like, I could make a case that he should be even higher when you consider like injury issues or age or potential decline for some of the other guys that I have up above him. But I think he's tremendous, and he makes up one of the single best linebacking duo in the entire NFL. And it's tough because too, for a lot of these positions, when we're ranking them, there are at least like 3 guys who get consistent rotation for any team, right? Like if it's cornerbacks, you got 3 guys who play a lot. If you include the nickel, if you got receivers, you got 3 guys. If you got interior offensive linemen, whatever the case. But linebackers are like, you only have 2, and usually you're lucky if you have one who's an impact player for you, right? And the 49ers are in this tremendous position where they've got 2. And for you, I mean, you got TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds here, which are now on the same team, or who are now on the same team with the Bears. So, I guess you'd expect them to have a really good linebacking unit as well. But for me, no one's going to beat the 49ers in terms of top units. And I think Dre Greenlaw deserves a spot on the top 10 as well. And I guess what I'll do is I'll make the case for Greenlaw, and then I'll let you go with Edmonds, and then maybe we can contradict each other slightly. So for Greenlaw, I think, he plays tremendously well off of Wagner. So Wagner plays all over the place. He's a sideline to sideline guy, plays tremendously in coverage, and he can do everything, right? He's probably the best linebacker in football right now. And Greenlaw fits in perfectly next to him. He's the enforcer, a little bit bigger, makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. And I think that if you're looking for that type of guy, I don't think there is one right now. I think he's that's better than him at doing that. If you've got your middle linebacker who you want to play everywhere, and then you got your other guy who's, the big dude, the tone setter, I feel like that's him. You know what I mean? And I feel like he's one of the reasons that the 49ers had the best defense last year. I mean, you look at him making, like, tipping up balls to himself, making really athletic plays, even if you don't think of him as a comparable athlete to Fred Warner, the way he gets it done is still very, very impressive. So athletically speaking, Tremaine Edmonds is probably better, but in terms of like how that translates to play, for me, Greenlaw is a guy that I would take, 10 times out of 10 over Tremaine Edmonds.
Yeah. So I think these guys are both pretty similar. So Tremaine Edmonds I think he's getting paid like he's a top. He's getting paid like he's a top 5 linebacker right now. And I don't think that he quite lines up with his contract. I actually think that was one of the more interesting contracts given out this past offseason. And I know Bills fans felt they didn't love seeing him go, but I don't think it necessarily broke their hearts either. But I do think Tremaine Edmonds is a little bit underrated. This is a 6'5", 250-pound. I believe he's a 4.55, 4.54 guy. So this is a freak athlete we're talking about. This is a rare mold. I think he catches a lot of flack playing behind what wasn't a great Buffalo Bills defensive line. I don't really think the D-line of the Bills from a run defense standpoint is necessarily that great. I think they do have some guys that give a little bit of pass rush ability, but in terms of what makes life easier for Edmonds, I don't necessarily think that, he came from the best situation. And I'm really interested to see him paired up with someone like TJ Edwards, who I think is able to handle more of those traditional duty roles and everything like that. And Edmonds is able to use that athletic ability this year and kind of get featured in some interesting ways and get kind of, played around a little bit more. I think Dre Greenlaw is the best linebacker too in football. I don't think there's anybody else. And I do think there's a few teams that he would be the best linebacker on the team for, but I don't value what he does that highly. So I agree that he's probably the best enforcer out there, but you know, there's lots of enforcers out there still, and you only have to really pay those guys a couple $1,000,000 to, be the hammer, and the other guy comes over and fills. There's the LVEs out there. There's, Rashawn Evans is a person who's now like that's just what he does for a living, is just runs straight into blocks for people. So I think Drake Greenlaw is the best at what he does. It's just that I don't really value that skill set a ton. I do think last year was a fantastic year with Fred Warner going down, and he really had to step up and do a lot more. Um, and he's somebody who I think is in fringe 10 range, so he's not far off from my list or anything like that. But yeah, for me, it just comes down to valuing what you do.
Yeah, I understand that. So I think based on your list also, like I can kind of see that there aren't many in the way of like true mics for you, right?
Yeah.
I think as I look across this, not to spoil it, but I think as I look across your list, the only player on the entire list who isn't a mic, actually there's two. Levante David is not, but TJ Edwards would be the other one. And I guess he was playing Mike for Philly,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I assume won't be.
Yeah, I don't think he would be either now.
But I see what you mean. I get that. I understand that. So it's like if there is the one most important linebacker on the field, then that's the case. For me, I understand. If you're a starting linebacker, then if you are great at what you do, you can still make the list for me. So I think no, there's another guy too who's not technically, but we'll get there when we get there. But my next guy is not a Mike either. So we can jump into number 6 here. So you got Eric Kendricks, who've already talked about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go too deeply into him, so I'll give you the opportunity here. And Matt Milano.
I think this would be my beef then with this one. Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
You want me to start with Eric or start with Matt?
Well, why don't you start with Eric? So because I've already talked about him, and then you can transition into Matt, and then I'll continue on there.
So I had Eric. I think he was going from 6 to 8 for me. We said all the good things about him. So I think a little case of the injury bug isn't going to slow him down at this stage of his career yet. He is a vet in this league, but he hasn't been around as long. I think he's been around for this is his 7th. He's going into his 7th year. So he hasn't quite hit that decade mark yet. Let me double check that. He's been here since 2015.
Okay.
So
he's a 2015 draft pick.
2015 draftee. So I feel like he still has, you mentioned, I think he has some high level years left in him. I think being on a new team, new system, he's got some guys on that defense with him that I think could make things exciting for the Chargers. The Chargers still have, that's a conversation for another day in terms of things that they need to do. But I like the situation that he's going to, and I really think that the veterans' instincts and savviness that we mentioned, is going to pay dividends for that Chargers defense in terms of, just the value that he's going to bring this year.
Mm-hmm. In terms of who was available and what they needed, I'm not sure there's a better fit in terms of somebody coming in to fill that role while they try and develop Deion Henley, because we both like him, but we both kind of know that it's going to be a minute before he should be your signal caller. I'm not even sure if he'll necessarily start for them. I think he was a 3rd round pick, and you never know, a guy could develop a little faster than you expect because there's a lot to love, but you can definitely expect some errors. You can expect some plays to be given up and whatnot for him. So I do love Kendricks coming in and being the guy for them who helps organize the defense, helps get people lined up, helps, be the coach on the field. I think they've had an underwhelming defense since since. Geez, I'm just struggling with names today. What's their head coach's name?
Not Schottenheimer.
No. The head coach of the Chargers.
Oh, Staley.
Staley. Since Staley got there,
Yeah.
it's been underwhelming because that's really his calling card, right? But I think a player like this is going to help tighten everything up, and hopefully, I mean, Henley has everything that you want to be like the next top 5 type of player. It's just going to take him a while to get there if he does.
Yeah.
So I get that. I like the fit. I think at this point in his career, one of his calling cards is like what Kendrick does well is he's the athlete out there, right? He's a sideline to sideline guy. And so if that's how you impact the game at that type of level, I think as you lose that a little bit, I'm a little bit concerned about like how heavily you impact the game. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Like
no, definitely.
if you're already not like a super crazy athlete and that's not how you dominate, then I'm not necessarily as worried about losing that like a step as far as that goes. But if that's how you win, then I wonder about it. You know what I mean? He's a coverage guy. I'm not sure. I think he's 30 years old at this point. I have to look it up real quick just to check, but I think he might have been a slightly older.
He is 31.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what age he came in, but yeah, second round pick in 2015. So I guess he would have been like 20, 22, turning 23, something like that. So, yeah, I mean, this is an age 31 season. It's just kind of like where we expect these guys to slow down a little bit. So he's like, he's still in my top 10. He's still a top 10 linebacker for me. But there's a couple of guys I gave the nod over him. All right. Tell me about Matt Milano, though. So what has him off the list for you? Is it the size? Is it the fact that he's not playing the mic position? What is it?
So part of it's that he doesn't play the mic. Size. So if there was an undersized linebacker that I would have put on this list, it probably would have been Nick Bolton over Matt Milano, just because
he could have definitely made the list for me.
He was somebody that was like, he was another guy where I was like, man, some of the natural instincts he has are just great. But yeah, I think Milano, he's just, I think he is an overachiever. So I think that's probably, I understand why a lot of people really like players like that, because he's obviously, I think, outplaying what many people had expected from him. But I just don't think he's somebody. I think of at the end of the day, when it comes down to like an athlete or best instincts in terms of being able to dissect any of those things, he's not really the best, or I would say, in terms of the upper echelon in that group, but he is very good at what he does.
Yeah, I think he's so instinctual, and I think he's so consistent in coverage that for me, like, he kind of represents everything that you want out of a number 2 linebacker. If he's not the enforcer, right? Like if your enforcer is the mic and you need somebody else who's going to be the coverage guy, if that's how you have your system set up, then I think there's nobody better than him. Yeah, is he an outperformer based on expectations? Definitely. You know what I mean? Is he a guy who's going to hit the tight end and like leave a lasting impression? No, he's not, but the chances of him getting a PBU are as high as anybody else out there. I feel like, his ability to turn the ball over with interceptions. If you look at the number of plays that, okay, so this is without looking at any like in-depth stats, but if you look at the number of plays where a linebacker is getting in there, making the tackle after 3 yards, right? Tackle house can be really high. But if you're looking at that type of stat and it's good, that's great. But a pass breakup is a more impactful play than that. I would say substantially, right? Or an interception is a more impactful play than that. And I think that as the linebackers go, he's as good as anyone at causing those. If you look at the Bills last season, they had their issues against the run, But the hardest time that their defense struggled was when Matt Milano wasn't in there, because he at least helped when the Bills would get ahead, when they would lead games, then the other team had to throw the ball to score or to catch up. He is a guy who helped keep that from happening. You know what I mean? That's when he's getting his big plays. I mean, you just throw on a highlight reel and you just see PBU after PBU after PBU. So for me, if we're talking about passing being the most impactful, the most valuable skill, or receiving is the most valuable skill, then we got to be talking about coverage being the most valuable skill. So I hear you, and I just think that what he lacks as an impact run defender, and he certainly makes plays behind the line of scrimmage in the run game, but his ability to get through a guard is not going to be at the same level as a bigger player. But I think that if you look at what he does in the passing game, it's extremely, extremely valuable. And I don't know how long his career will be, because I think a lot of it is instincts. I think a lot of it is knowing the game. And if there is a drop off in athleticism, we might see him have a shorter peak than maybe some other guys.
Right.
But at least right now in 2023, he's one of my favorite linebackers in the entire NFL. All right.
Fair enough.
That is I just got on my soapbox for Matt Milano. All right. So
top five.
Right. Let me see here. So we actually have the same number 5. And this is a guy certainly who I think, could arguably be even higher, but also could arguably be lower if availability is your number one ability, it's your number one asset. He's, maybe one of the worst in the NFL at that right now. I'm not sure how many games he's missed off the top of my head, but it's a lot. He missed the majority of the season last year, missed a good number of games the year before that. And he's always had nagging injuries that he's played through to some degree. And he's a force to be reckoned with when he's out there. He's one of the few linebackers on the list that aren't Mike, but his ability to create impact plays behind line of scrimmage and his savvy when it comes to creating turnovers is something special. And there's really no doubt about that. New age linebacker, quite thin. And that's probably one of the reasons that he's had these issues with staying healthy. But long, when he gets his hands in there and on passing plays, has a really well-timed, well-aimed punch to get the ball out. He just does such a good job when it comes to that. So it's he's a guy where it's tough. I'd love to put him higher. I could get the argument if you put him lower, but regardless, he's extremely good when he's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's it sounds like you're talking about Bob Sanders with how you started that, Colts defender who's just electric and has these natural instincts, and the ability to impact in the turnover game is just, it's hard to replicate. And the defense has certainly struggled with him off the field. And for me, that's really why he's sitting at 5, is just because availability is the best ability, and if we're not seeing him play, it's hard to put him over some of these guys that I have over him on the list. But this is a 2-time All-Pro. This is somebody who lit the league on fire when they came out. So really hope that he's able to stay healthy, get back, because if he gets back to who he was before all these injuries, this is a guy that could be fighting for number 2 and number 1 on this list. But it's just not there right now.
Yeah. So I worry about him because I need to look at his contract, but if this pace keeps up, or at least anything close to it, the Colts are really going to have no choice but to move on from him. And then what kind of contract is he going to get if teams are constantly worried that he's, unavailable, and then, he might be a steal for somebody if that were to be the case. But he's just never going to be the same player again, or maybe he just won't ever be out there enough to just be out there consistently enough to be that guy. But you definitely hope that's not the case. And I mean, I have to look it up because I'm just curious here. See how many games he's played over the past couple of years. So, yeah, last year was the worst by far. As a rookie, he played in 15 games, played in 13 games in 2019, played in 14 games in 2014. So he missed a couple, nothing crazy, but he played hurt a lot, played in 16 in 2021, and then only played in 3 and only started one of those games. He had, for a linebacker, a pretty crazy number of interceptions. I mean, 2, 5. Then he didn't have any in 2020, but then he had 4 again in 2021, and he even had 1 in the couple of snaps that he played last year. Forced fumbles, 4, 2, 3, 8. These are crazy numbers.
Yeah.
And so like that statistically, then you can see why he's so impactful. Well over 100 tackles in every season that he played a substantial number of games. So, and if you look at just the games played, it doesn't necessarily jump out at you in terms of just like a major injury history, but he's just always banged up. Like, he's on the injury report every single week. You don't know if he's playing until the last possible minute. You watch the Colts Hard Knocks and you see like he's just, you know what I mean? He's fighting through it. Struggling to get out there, and he's like a guy that you hope for. And it just kind of it felt, at least to me, a little bit like 2022 was kind of the culmination of all that, and he just couldn't play through it anymore. So hopefully he comes in a little bit healthier this year. But it's tough. It has got to be frustrating for Colts fans who, this is the best player on your team, maybe besides DeForest Buckner, or maybe Quentin Johnston or Quentin Nelson, but to just have him and be so worried about what that's going to look like going forward is for sure. All right. So at number 4, you have Bobby Wagner and I have Demario Davis. I mean, I feel like we see both of these guys pretty similarly. That's funny. Both of these guys have probably stood the test of time better than most. And Davis has had a shorter prime than others because it took him a while to really hit that peak. But ever since then, he's just been that kind of guy. Like, great in coverage. He long, physical leader, like everything you want from the position. Both of these guys are. I think Wagner's a little bit stouter, like physically speaking. But both do a tremendous job. And it's really cool that Wagner is able to go back to the Seahawks and kind of be that guy again, because I almost wonder if he's going to have a better year this year, just because the team he was playing on last year was really not good. They were behind all the time, which is tough to play. A lot of 3-and-outs. It's like really hard to be very consistent and good as a defender when that's the case. And even when they weren't behind, like, the supporting cast just wasn't there. So I think he flew under the radar for a lot of people, but he quietly had another pretty good season. And I think going back to a Seattle defense where they have one corner who's pretty proven at this point, could stand to probably get a little bit more consistent than a high draft pick at the position. And some other guys who, are good. Hopefully a healthy Jamal Adams, who knows at this point. But just on paper, at least, a much better situation than last year, and certainly a much better offense. So, not as much pressure on him. So I'd be excited to see what he does. Davis at this point, it's like, I think there's no reason to move him down the list yet. But if you are going to project, like, he's got to have a drop off at some point one of these years. It'd be tough tough not to. But he's a great athlete, and there hasn't really been any signs of him slowing down.
Oh. Yeah, no. Yeah, you've said pretty much everything about Wagner. So yeah, I don't really have much to add on that front. I think he's showed that he's still that guy. He was, I think he was probably, besides Aaron Donald, the best player on that defense last year, better than Jalen Ramsey. So I think that a return to home is going to be really good for him, and I'm excited to see how he does.
Well, you have Demario Davis here coming up in just a minute, so if you want to transition right into him, then
Yeah, let's do it. So Demario Davis is actually 3 for me. And he and Bobby were going back and forth in the 3 and 4 spot. Demario Davis has terrorized my Falcons for what feels like far too long at this point. He's somebody that, really, I mean, he was doing it all for them at one point. He was blitzing at nearly a 20% clip. It was around 18%. 2 seasons ago, they pulled back on that, had him doing it at about 13% rate. He's very efficient, very successful off the blitz. He's great in coverage. He pretty much can take care of most tight ends. He's somebody that I think you could project that he is maybe due and could be coming down, but he also is someone to me where I think he might be that freak like Bobby who can somehow maintain this play for a
mhm.
couple more years longer than we anticipate. And it's funny, because there's a difference of maintaining at like a Levante David level, and then there's a difference of maintaining at like the level of like the two guys that we just spoke about. Because they really are in just a different tier in terms of impact and what they can do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, Bobby Wagner, Levante David, and Demario Davis all came out of the same draft class. I think they're all 2012 guys. Um,
Sounds
and
right.
I think David and Wagner were both second round picks, and I think Davis was a third round pick, if I remember right. But Bobby Wagner and Levante David both kind of took the league by storm. Like Wagner put himself in the conversation as one of the best in the NFL almost immediately. Levante David was kind of there by his second year. Davis, he took a little while. I mean, I think he played out his full rookie contract um, with the Jets, and then he went to the Browns, and then he was back with the Jets or something like that. He bounced back and forth between those two teams for like the first 4 or 5 years of his career. And then he signs a deal with the Saints, and he was like decent, so he didn't get a bunch of money. And it was like that year he just took off.
Yeah,
So
it was
it took him
his.
a
It
bit,
was
but
Yeah, no, it was really like a lot of people credit Ryan Nielsen, and Dennis Allen with his development. Ryan Nielsen was coaching that group at that time, and that was you're right. He started with the Jets, was there for 4 years, hopped to Cleveland for a year, went back to the Jets in 2017, and then has been with the Saints since 2018. And yeah, he was a third round pick. Levante and Bobby were second rounders. So you were right on that front as well. And he's somebody who's just gotten better. I think with time, he
mhm.
found the right coaching staff and he found the right scheme to really showcase his skill set.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember what it was now. He played his full rookie contract with the Jets. Never like he became a decent player. Signed
Yeah,
a
he's
2 year
okay.
deal with the Browns. He had a good year with them. It was a pretty good year. And then he got traded back to the Jets in a deal where they sent Calvin Pryor to the Browns. Todd Bowles came in. He's like, get this guy out of here. So came back to the Jets, and he played the second year of that 2 year deal. And again, had a good year. It seemed like he was getting better every single year, but he hadn't
Hmm.
really elevated to elite yet. And so that's 6 years of playing football in the NFL and being a starter every single one of those seasons. And then all of a sudden, like this is like you never hear of this ever. Like it's so rare where a guy plays that many seasons, and then like you have Homer fans who are like, this could be the year that he's great. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, who he is. And this is, if there's a case to be made that it is possible, he is that case where a situation actually does make that much of a difference, because he goes to the Saints in 2018 and is just awesome. Signs an extension with them, and he's probably going to be there for a bit because of the way that they structure their deals. But yeah, he's a really fun player to watch for sure. And it's hard to fathom him continuing to be that good because he's 34. And the 7, 8, 9, 10. He had 5 years of college before he even came to the NFL.
He's been playing ball for a while.
For so long. But he was a freak athlete when he came out, and has everything that you want, and he's just so consistent. He's been an All-Pro for 3 straight years, second team, and first team for the year before that. So I mean, what can you really expect him to drop off? I don't know. I mean, he's basically flouted every other conventional expectation for a player like him at this point. So maybe we shouldn't doubt him. All right. So guess let's see here at number 2. We have the same player here. So
it
makes sense. Whoa. I mean, I already prefaced it a little bit by saying that Fred Warner is basically the best linebacker in football, and basically was unnecessary because he is the best linebacker in football. Yeah. So we could kind of talk about it however we want, but this is another player where you look at a situation, and I don't think he was necessarily not good or bad in Chicago, but getting into Baltimore allowed him to play well in a better defense for one thing, just with more quality players around him, but also in a way that I think really benefits him as well. And he had an awesome season once he got there, and earned a very lucrative contract. And now I think there's a lot of conversation around how wise it was maybe to send a second round pick for an inside linebacker and immediately pay him the farm. But I think that if you are going to, I think that there is something to be said for trading for a player and then making him the highest paid player at his position, all with a player who doesn't deal with an agent, and being like, look, this is how we do things. If you want to operate without an agent, like, we're willing to negotiate, we're willing to do all of this with you, we'll make you the highest paid. This is how we do it. Right. And I think with the whole Lamar Jackson situation, like, beat for beat, that's kind of everything that they were looking to get done without, and kind of be like, hey, like, look and talk to this guy, right? Like, he knows what he's doing. So I think that, if you're going to look at, I don't know if it's the right decision, but I think if you're going to look at that and understand that that was part of this, I mean, there's just too many coincidences and too many crossovers for it not to be. And I think it helped their team as well. But I think when you look at that, and it meant getting Lamar Jackson signed to an extension and getting all of that taken care of, done with, there is some inherent value in that as well. Yeah. Is it worth a second round pick? Is it worth $20 million for a linebacker? I can't answer that. But what I can tell you is that it was definitely part of it, and there is at least some value that exists there. So why is Roquan one of your favorite players at the position?
Yeah, I think it's really funny. He's somebody that I felt like with the Bears, like, he was just so, I don't know, not out of place, but I just don't think it was really going to be the fit. I don't think the team really, I think when he was drafted without a plan. I don't think that they necessarily were kind of firing on all cylinders at that point. But that being said, he's now a Raven. He's in a system that I mean, the guy is running around and he looks free. He looks so smooth. Everything looks natural. It just looks like that he's in a system that's really going to allow him to use that athletic ability that makes him so special. And I think they're really smart um, with how they've kind of gone at that linebacker room. You know, we talk about the money. Patrick Queen right there on the roster. It looks like he's due, for his 5th year. Well, they already have that backup plan in place with Simpson, and he's somebody that we talked about earlier this offseason who,
Mm-hmm.
we both kind of like, but we feel like there's a lot there that he needs to learn. And I think now they have the linebacker room for him to be able to soak up that knowledge and learn from, from 2 guys that are really going to be able to help him and help him understand how to use his skill set. But Roquan's just a difference maker. He's somebody that, he's the only person I think that could threaten Fred Warner for that top spot. He could just do it all. I think he's going to be one of the best number zeros this year. Love the jersey switch. And yeah, I honestly think that somebody has to pay the elite players, right? We talk about is it worth a second? Is it worth this much money? And somebody's going to pay it. At some point, someone's going to pay these guys. We all feel how we feel about, positional value, and obviously there's nuance to everything, but top 3 guys at their positions, regardless of wherever they are going to get paid like top 3 guys. So I like the move by the Ravens. I feel like that they have a plan in place for how to deal with that. And, I think he's somebody where, it's going to be him and Fred Warner. And we're talking about this next generation of linebackers, and people are looking at those 2 guys as the molds for that, the kind of linebackers that teams want to have on their team that just make their defenses better and more impactful.
Yeah, he's a guy who almost immediately when he came into the league, he was drafted highly and he had a lot of splash plays, but there were some inconsistencies as you'd expect from a rookie. His 2nd year, he was banged up. He missed some time. I also think it affected his play a bit. But then from 2020 through 2022, he's been one of the best linebackers in football, albeit on a team that wasn't that good for the most part. They did, was it 2020 when they made it to the playoffs? I think it was, but they got smoked.
The COVID year. Yeah.
They got smoked, and it was, I don't think that was unexpected based on the situation, but he's been the best player on that defense for a while, and he's just gotten better and better each year, and going to Baltimore is great for him. Getting paid is great for him. All of that is fantastic for him. He's in his prime. I think he's going to be 26 for the majority of this year. And, you would expect like for an athlete like him, I think you expect a good 3-4 years of prime. So if you're going to make that investment, you've got it. You got that under like cost control for those 4 years, and he'll be the leader of your defense for a while. And, we'll see. I think Patrick Queen was never quite the player that they hoped for, being drafted relatively highly. And, he's a guy that, I think he's got one more year under contract with them, and then maybe Simpson comes in. Every single player out of this draft class for Clemson, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, had a lot of similarities to me in terms of the way they played. Great athleticism for all of them. Like really a rare, exceptional for some of them, and seemingly a lack of instinct. Some of them seem to have more play recognition than others, but none of them really had like an aggressive play style. And so it just seems like when you look at that and you have this pattern across an entire defense, then maybe you can't assume this is the case, but maybe you have to wonder, is this just the way that they're being coached? You know what I mean? And are we going to see a bigger jump from some of these guys than we expect? Right? I think Simpson was a 3rd round pick, if I'm not mistaken, this year. And then Bresee and Murphy both being 1st round picks. Like obviously the athleticism is there to fall back on being drafted that high. But are we going to see one, two, or even all three of these guys kind of outperform what we saw at Clemson or not. I don't know. But to your point, is there a better player for him to learn behind than Roquan Smith? Probably not right now. I mean, you could put him behind like another vet, but in terms of like, guys who are getting it done right now, he's the one.
Yeah.
All right. So let that take us to our number one guy here, and that is Fred Warner. And I think at this point, is he as big or as physical as a Roquan Smith? No, but does he just not do everything so incredibly well? I mean, the speed, the athleticism, the length, his coverage ability, his sideline to sideline run defense, his ability to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. He is everything that you could ever want out of modern day linebacker at this point.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we talk about the position getting devalued, and what that can translate to is a steal, and that's exactly what Fred Warner was. We're talking about this guy was 3rd round pick, 70th pick in the draft, and I mean, he's lights out. He's fluid is I think the word I think of when it comes to watching him. Fluid in the run game, fluid in the pass game. Everything looks natural. The instincts, the ability. It doesn't look like it doesn't look like he's ever taken a wrong step on film. And he's a ton of fun to watch right now. I think you said, maybe not the stoutest of the guys, but he has that length, 6'3". He's special. And what it is for me really is just I've never seen a middle linebacker essentially erase the intermediate middle of a defense. And that's honestly where his value comes from, is the fact that teams don't throw between 10 to 19 on them because he's there and he's able to cover that. And that's truly what makes him special in this modern era is the ability to be a shutdown linebacker.
Yeah, I think he was a safety at BYU, and they basically were like, okay, we're going to take you and ask you to put on a few pounds and try and turn you into consistent inside linebacker for us. And it worked better than I think anybody could ever have imagined. And teams have been trying to do that, particularly teams who run the same style of defense that they did and still do in San Francisco. They've been looking for these guys who are, really good athletes. Maybe they don't fit like the too high coverage or free safety mold that like really makes you a special safety nowadays. And they're like, we're going to just move you down, use that athleticism and some of those ball skills and just try and get you to fit the run, right? Because as running backs are generally getting a little bit smaller, as the run game it's turned into something a little bit different. It's like for a lot of teams, it's more about, keeping defenses honest as opposed to being the way that they establish their offense. Like, so you don't necessarily have to be the same type of physical linebacker. So if you can stop the run or if you can stop the pass, whatever you give up in the run it's less of a loss for us than what a lesser coverage backer would give up in the passing game. So people have been looking to do that, and certainly nobody's been able to do it nearly as effectively as they have in San Francisco with Fred Warner. And so he's a treat, and he'll be around for a good while. There's no suggesting that he'll slow down anytime in the near future. But really, really fun player to watch, and I suspect he'll carry that that moniker of number one linebacker in the NFL for at least a couple of more years. Will he make an all-pro every single year? No, he might be a little injured, but I think in terms of like going into the season expectations, he'll be that guy for a good long while now.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's the bar. And when you're the bar, people try to emulate you, and like you said, there's a lot of people that have tried to find that mold. There's a lot of people that try to, turn those safeties into linebackers. It's funny, that's like Brian Urlacher, right? He was a safety in college, gets moved to linebacker, played down low. And sometimes when it hits, man. it's like gold. And the 49ers struck gold with Fred.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So that's going to do it for us today for our top 10 linebackers in the NFL. I'd love to see somebody break out here so that we can have more than just 5 guys who we are like, firmly talking about as elite impact players. It seems like we've got these 5 elite guys, and then we've got maybe another 6 or 7 guys who are either impact players at one point in their career and just not quite there anymore, or just really good at one specific skill set and just aren't like that fully well-rounded player. And so we'll see if anybody kind of becomes that and helps flesh out this position a little bit at the top. But for now, this is it going into 2023. Tre'Shon, thanks for joining me, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
All right. Remember, you can find Defiant Takes Football at Defiant Takes on all social media outlets. You can find me on Twitter at The Magazine. Tre'Shon is at Trey3Sean. And of course, all of our live streams Monday and Thursday night, 11 p.m. Eastern. All of our film breakdowns going to be on the channel as well. We have our brick wall breakdowns focusing on offensive line with Kyron. And then, of course, our DTF film sessions with a rotating cast, including Tre'Shon, of course, breaking down players along with myself, and all of our written work at DefiantTakesFootball.com. Appreciate y'all for joining us, and we will see you all very soon.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.